Coogs House. When March Madness rolls around, Houston figures to be one of the top teams in the field of 68. But how much longer are things going to be that way?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can latest on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back to the YouTube channel. We are so dangerously close to crossing that 2,000 threshold, and we're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers on YouTube. So hit subscribe, help us get there. I can't believe, pause, I actually almost held off from recording to see if we'd get this before I could announce it. Decided to go ahead and let's get an episode out. Let's talk to the people. Anyway, but hit subscribe, help us get to 2,000 marks. We can give something away to folks liking and commenting. If after liking and commenting on this, you don't know what to say, you just have no idea what to say about all the changes potentially happening in college sports, tell us in the comments down below. What did you think of the Temu ads at the Super Bowl? Got a lot of thoughts for a different podcast on a different day. Now, today's episode is going to be looking all at a handful of things that kind of broke news on Tuesday as far as things that could be coming and changing in college sports. First and foremost, the new news is that it feels inevitable there are some changes happening to March Madness in the not-so-distant future. No real dates on that yet, but we'll talk about what that means and what those changes are. The second thing is that this all ties to similar changing conversations about change in the college football playoff. And last, but certainly not least, in our third segment, I'm going to want to talk some about, honestly, this idea of revenues, and more revenues. But first, in the first segment, I want to open up by talking about the article that came out by Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports. Dellenger had a detailed list of a bunch of people, confidential kind of stuff that he had talked to within high-ranking offices in college athletics. Talked about the future of where the sports are going, where the NCAA is going. You're going to see more athlete compensation and further deregulation and an overhaul of college football playoff and revenue distribution. And it felt like a quote, inevitable expansion of the men's NCAA basketball tournament. Now, I would pause on that and say, if you're going to expand the men's tournament with how much the women's tournament has grown in the last 2 or 3 years, especially, and really I could go back the last 15, but it feels like it's exponentially grown in the last couple with Sabrinas and Caitlins and Angels and so on, right? That it does feel like they would grow both, but he's speaking on the men's behalf in this instance. And I think it's interesting that he says that the ACC and Big 12 commissioner, or those offices, worked closely with the Big 10 and SEC commissioners in talking about the growth of this. They even somewhat talked to the Pac-12 and Kliavkoff, right? Like I guess that's technically not dead yet. And the SEC and Big 10 both remain serious about needing an advisory board to help with things like the lawsuits. There's one happening, I think it's a trial in January 2025, right, about athlete compensation and stuff like that. Apparently his correspondence, this Dellenger, said that Sankey insists that these meetings are an attempt to really start looking at fixing a system that helps everyone, not necessarily at some sort of an exodus in regards to anything like that. It does sound optimistic that the Big 12 and ACC do have a future in the landscape, which is nice to know as Houston just got into the Big 12. As far as NCAA tournament goes, Houston has a basketball school and basketball power and growing into a blue blood of sorts. Interesting to see that the commissioners met in January and started looking apparently at tournament expansion. Commissioners of Power 5 leagues, yes, the Pac-12 was included in that, started talking about how can they expand the tournament. And to be fair, their argument's all about dollars and cents. Power 6 schools, you include the Big East when you talk about basketball typically, look at the NCAA tournament as at least a $200 million revenue bump each year because of how many units they get each year. In the tournaments, units are what you get per school as a do well, because the TV dollars and those kinds of things trickle into the entire conference, right? So like the Big 12 has 10 of 14 schools. They start off the first weekend with 10 units. If all 10 make it to the second weekend, they get 10 more units the second weekend, and so on and so forth, right? Now, as it's currently standing, March Madness is the largest NCAA revenue gainer, I should say, because the college football playoff is technically operating outside of the NC2A. And so this is a big deal for all of college sports, even though it's basketball and not football, right? The conversation, though, stems from you have 68 teams as it presently stands. Now, I remember the days when we had 65 and 64. You presently have 68, right, with 4 play-in games, and then you have the 64-team bracket. After that, they technically call the 4 play-in games round 1, but whatever, right? Of those 68 teams, there are 32 automatic qualifiers, and then the other 36 are all at large, picked by a committee, right? We know how that works, do that process every year. Houston's been on the good side of it for a while now. Of those automatic qualifiers, 27 are typically non-power schools, meaning low revenue, maybe negative revenue, which would be a loss. Parker, I know I teach history, not math. And only 5 of the AQs would be automatic qualifying power schools with big-time revenues. The conference commissioners are trying to figure out how to maximize that system and get more power schools. But also, part of the intrigue, the reason the NCAA tournament's worth so much, is that those small school AQs, automatic qualifiers, are valuable commodities because you get the George Masons every once in a while that gets the entire country watching the Final Four and drives up the TV price. So you don't want to lose those either. So the only way to add Power 5 schools without taking away the 27 AQs from smaller conferences is to inevitably add more seats, expand the tournament. And this feels so matter of fact. It's the way they're talking about it, though, is that this is just going to happen. It's a matter of time and logistics. I already would point out that March Madness currently ends in April. I believe the Final Four this year ends on my birthday, April 8th, right? Like this is, that'd be a great birthday present, Houston, by the way, to win it on April 8th. But this is a large, massive tournament as it stands, and expanding it from 68 to like 130 or something like that to just double it would be outrageous, but it feels like we're heading to somewhere, maybe adding another round of play-ins or making every 16 seed game and every 15 seed game play-in type games or whatever. You're adding more games to this. Here's the deal. I get that this makes more money, but my point on the NCAA tournament growing is that as it presently stands, this only stands in a way that can hurt the Houston Cougars. Houston will make the tournament if it's 64 teams. There are a lot of years where Houston will make the tournament if it's 44 teams. There are a lot of years before the Big 12. We'll see how the Big 12 things goes over the next handful of years. But there are a lot of years before the Big 12 where Houston will make the tournament if there were 28 teams, right? Because they'd win the conference. And so it feels like what you're doing in adding more teams is adding more randomness. And more randomness could actually hurt Houston in terms of the revenue you'd make on winning tournament games individually, right? Obviously, like things like merch sales, you get some share of the gate, but just exposure and the like more hypothetical economic growth that brings could all be hurt by having to play more games. Because while I love the NCAA tournament, it is not a great way to pick a winner, a best team in college basketball, because it is just so random. That's why you have 16 seeds winning over 1 seeds. That's why you have George Mason's making it to the Final Four. That's why we have all of these things. And the more teams you add, the more likely that chaos happens to a school like Houston. Now, have there been doldrum days where Houston would have been the team causing the chaos? Oh, man, absolutely. But as it stands now, with Sampson and Sampson and company and the program we've built, we only stand to be hurt by that chaos. If the best team, if they played 3-game series or something like that, and you were just picking a team to actually, win multiple basketball games in a weekend, with scattering reports and things like that, we obviously feel like Houston would do very, very well. The program is set up to do so, right? The reason you don't have as many upsets in pro basketball or pro baseball is they play 7-game series, less 1-game random samples. These 1-game random samples can hurt Houston. Adding more is problematic for both the program as it develops in terms of how far it gets and things like that, odds at a Final Four and but also the randomness of it. You tweak an ankle there, foul out of that game, bad shooting night over there, so-and-so catches a cold. All of those things only happen more the more you add games. Now, I love going to games, and I think Houston win a lot of games, and I think Houston's going to go very, very far. I frankly applied for my media credentials to hopefully watch them go very, very far in person this spring. But if you like watching games and you maybe don't get to go get that media credential, or you need to go find some other way to go do it, Game Time is the place to be, because right now they've got all kinds of cool things online to help you find the best ticket in town, whether it's Houston hosting Texas on Saturday or Houston hosting Iowa State for a revenge game on Monday night. Both of those things are on Game Time. Now, if you've got your tickets to the games and looking for concerts, theater, comedy, pro sports in the city of Houston, anything you need, they've got at Game Time. So download the Game Time app today. Check out the cool options they have. You can see what the view's going to look like from your seat. You can pick a row and section, let them pick the seat for you, have an average of 18% savings, all kinds of great stuff right now. So with terms applying, go ahead and download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, so I mentioned college basketball randomness and how that could hurt Houston. But Houston has also moved into the big leagues in terms of football. And Dellenger alluded to an earlier report of his about the college football playoff and how the SEC and Big Ten have already had discussions on things shifting in that landscape. And I thought it was interesting to kind of see the tie-ins to the expanding March Madness theoretically. And I think it's always important to think about this as a team that just got to the big league, so to speak, to just got to the Power Five, and think about okay, now that we just got here, you're already shifting the tectonic plates. And what does that look like it will do for the Cougs? As it stands currently, I should point out, the Big Ten and the SEC have been talking, right? We'll get to that in a second. But in football, there are fewer leagues. There are 10 conferences, Power 5, Group of 5 presently. Pac-12 is kind of up in the air. That number can all change. But as we presently speak, we know there are 10. There's also a lot more money. The college football playoff brings in over $1.3 billion a year, right? That's a lot more money and a lot less schools and a lot, frankly, bigger pie for less slices means bigger pie slices for everyone. I teach history, not math, but I do like pie. By the end of the 2025 college football playoff contract, the SEC and Big Ten, and the reason they've been meeting, is they're going to have 34 members across 26 states. And so it feels like they're going to have a lot of say in this. Their 34 members, for what it's worth, have also had good high levels of success in the college football playoffs as it stands, and they feel like they should have some say in this. I look at this and say, frankly, not only would I want your marks, innovation, and creativity and marketing in those meetings, but I would also probably feel like if you're going to go how big a brush you paint across the country, the fact that the ever-growing Big 12 is going to be up to 16 teams and across every time zone in football season and yada, yada, yada. I think all of those things will also play a role in helping keep the Big 12 around. It also has a more media-friendly deal in the ACC, and we've done that show before. But I think it's worth pointing out that the same perks that the Big 10 and SEC think they have, you could argue the Big 12 has as well. And I'd also point out that some of the schools the SEC and Big 10 are claiming, I guess a couple in particular, one in particular, are former Big 12 schools that did it while they were Big 12 schools. But all that is to say that with that contract looming in 2025, the college football playoff contract, I think everyone kind of assumes it's going to be just re-upped. But people are starting to talk like, are we going to do that? And earlier in the month, earlier in February, the SEC and Big Ten commissioners' offices had the idea to create a joint advisory group of university presidents and chancellors and athletic directors to kind of address the ever-changing landscape. They want to look at the college football playoff and how to best build that to fit the schools, but also they want to look at how they could have some sort of a larger, not necessarily like regulation since they want to cut it down, but regulation in the sense that like there's just some rule and order to the transfer portals and the transfer markets and those kinds of things among football players. And then the ever-changing NIL industry and how to make sure that no one's taking advantage of kids, but also no businesses are getting skittish and unable to help donate the money to the kids for their name, image, likeness. And I say donate because it's a loose usage of the word pay, but that's not this episode either. Honestly, it all sounds like some levels of regulation the SEC and Big Ten are determining are key. I think Houston would benefit largely from that because Houston has a lot of resources and it's a big city, a lot of big businesses and so on, but it doesn't have the endless resources of a football blue blood that's built it up over 30, 40, 50 years. We're kind of working to get that back still. So some regulation would frankly help Houston catch up. But I say all to say that I'm not sure that schools presently are actually not in favor of just flat pay-for-play kind of stuff. If it's out in the open and out openly being discussed and frankly openly being regulated, I almost think that they'd rather just do that because they could have some more say in how that kind of thing happens instead of the back alley kind of stuff with envelopes and social media posts and like, oh, this is my ad for so-and-so, and then boom, bunch of money, right? Obviously, SEC and Big Ten have said this is not their starting of a breakaway process, but they would never admit that it was the start of a breakaway process. So take that with a appropriate grain of salt. It's interesting, though, because as it currently stands, the college football playoff is technically not an NCAA championship. And that is to say that it's not through the NCAA, it's through this other entity, right? That's why March Madness stands as the biggest championship game moneymaker within the NCAA, right? Now, all of that is to say that in terms of Houston's involvement, regulation, as I mentioned, should help Houston. Growing playoff brackets should help Houston. Valuing things like a lot of states should help Houston because Houston's now in the Big 12. I think there's a lot of hubbub when these meetings started because it was the SEC and the Big Ten. And people were like, oh no, it's happening again. You're watching the shift of college football away from the Big 12 and ACC. And what does that mean? It means Houston's going to sign up for this. We're going to hitch our wagon to this pony, and then that pony's not going to run. And I just don't think that that's actually what's happening here. And I don't actually think it's what's happening in the sense that it's actually going to be left behind. What I think is happening is that the established two are the Big Ten and the SEC. What the ACC and Big 12 and thus Houston do is much more up in the air. We've had the episode before we talk about why I think the Big 12 is going to end up taking some ACC schools. But in short, it's because the media deal is much, much, much more school friendly, and that there's a handful of schools in the ACC that got upset enough could dissolve the entire thing very quickly by refusing to pay the grant of rights. And then it's who are going to pay them to if the whole thing is dissolved, right? I weirdly left reading about Dellenger's thoughts after talking to people in charge of the SEC and Big Ten of the college football playoff optimistic, whereas other people, I think, read them and walked away pessimistic. I think that the regulation helps Houston in a number of different ways. I think the setup they're describing, as long as Houston can remain in the dance, and I think that they will, like I said, is actually a good thing. I'm not a betting man, But I bet that there's a lot more on this between now and January 1st of 2025. I just think that this is a story far from over. I think it's a story that we're going to hear a lot more about. But like I said, I'm not a betting man. If you're a betting man, if you're a betting woman, if you're a betting person, and you want to get in on the action, Super Bowl's over, and you're like, how do I make? If you're not a basketball person, but you want to make it more interesting, or you are a basketball person, and you think I know so much about basketball, I'm ready to get in on this and help grow my wallet. You can go right now and get buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's any winning $5 bet. Get you $150 in bonus bets. Now, you guys know I'm a Houston person. Actually, I have a Rockets hat on right now. Phi Slam on the shirt. Rockets hat on. I'm representing the whole city right now. But the Houston Rockets on Wednesday night head to Memphis to play the Grizzlies and are 4-point favorites. Feels like forever since Houston Rockets been a favorite. They're 4-point favorites on the road in Memphis. I gotta say, I kind of like that. Now, there's all kinds of other odds in there too. You can go to March Madness stuff, National Championship stuff, get in on the Cougs in all kinds of different ways, or you go check out the pro basketball landscape as we're getting to that part of the year where basketball dominates all of the airwaves. Now, whatever you're doing, you got to go do it at FanDuel.com because it's so easy and simple to use. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, so we've talked a lot today in today's episode about revenue and college sports and making money. And I've got what feels like a fraternity shirt on here with my Phi Slam pajama. I've got my college shirt on still from work, right? Feel like a prep. And I think what's interesting is, and the soapbox of sorts that I like to always tie these kinds of thoughts back to, is that it's weird that college sports are revenue. I get why, right? We all love watching. TV is money. TV is ad space. Ad spaces are money. I get the equation. I'm not saying it's nonsensical. And frankly, I appreciate that in the year 2024, or the last handful of years, we're looking to get that money into the players' pockets and not other people, right? I love that kids now are getting the kinds of NIL deals that can take care of their families, even if it's as simple as helping get their families to games. If it's more in detail and depth and like helping feed them, obviously, power to them. I love those things. I'm not advocating against them. I do think it's weird, though, that college athletics are revenue based. We talk about revenue sports, and frankly, the opposite, because everything has an opposite, of a revenue sport is a non-revenue sport. And a non-revenue sport is intuitively anything except for football and a handful of schools, their basketball program, their men's basketball program. And the discussion is frankly always, should we remove revenue sports? Should we take out football away from the university and kind of operate in its own sphere because it's different, it makes money and those kinds of things. And it is different. It does make money. But I don't think that makes it the only thing that makes value. And I think there's an important difference and distinction to look at when looking at college athletics, right? We don't talk about getting rid of a economics program at a university because it doesn't bring back a bunch of money. No one's trying to get rid of the media department at a university because it doesn't bring in a bunch of money, right? We're not going to take away the debate team because it doesn't bring in a bunch of money. We're not going to take away the coffee shop on campus because it doesn't bring in a bunch of money. We're not going to take away things that add to education, experience, development, etc., because they don't bring in a bunch of money. If we look at the landscape of college and continue to do this, even in college sports, and only value the things that make revenue, it gets dark, it gets bleak, it gets scary fast. And that's because, frankly, the educational ties to the non-revenue parts of this, and this is, again, soapbox, pie in the sky. But if college sports weren't tied to education, how long does it take them to get integrated? How long does it take them to have women's leagues? Title IX drives so much of that. We're talking Title IX, and I guess it's over 50 years old at this point, but like, truthfully, Title IX leads to the WNBA in 1997, and 1997's WNBA starting leads to the Caitlin Clarks, the Angel Reeses, the aforementioned college basketball stars of women's college basketball today. If Title IX doesn't start any of that, because it's all, whatever makes money, does any of that ever happen? And then, frankly, at a much more macro level, right? What future revenue are you costing yourself as a nation, as a country, right? If there's the WNBA in its not quite 30 years has grown exponentially, right? And it's just skyrocketed, and the market it's in, it's taken over in a lot of different ways. It's very much, it's gone from a kind of a niche thing in the late 90s, early 2000s to a much bigger thing, a summer basketball league of sorts, right? And it's a very specific example. But you don't get it if you don't have women playing college basketball. And you don't have women playing college basketball if college basketball is only looked at in the 1950s and 60s as, well, does it make money or not? And I think that, while again, I understand college athletics and revenue, I wonder if that's the pejorative of the opposite of that is harmful to a lot more bigger and important things. Things don't have to make money to have value. We don't judge a fire department on whether or not it makes money, right? We don't judge a police department on whether or not it makes money. We judge them on the value they add. We don't judge the public school system, and we should not judge the public school system whether or not it makes money. It's on the value it adds to our life, to our society. College sports add a lot of value to my life. I think they add a lot of value to yours if you made it this far in the episode and you've heard me rant. I think that we should look at them not as like, well, if we just got to separate the revenue things and screw everything else. I don't think that's a healthy way to go about this. Now, I will say, I say all that, I do appreciate that in the year of our Lord 2024, we are paying the kids in some way. I think we got to continue to look for ways to make sure that they're getting the fair share of the pie. Right? Go back to that pie metaphor. Because frankly, if someone's going to get paid for this, we're going to talk about revenues and all, and so, then we do have to give the money to the kids. They're the ones playing, right? And frankly, the next steps are more money, bigger piece, more appropriate size piece of the pie, pay for play, because why beat around the bush with this anymore? Residuals, because we continue to sell their jerseys in the store well after they graduate. We use their images on our marketing well after they graduate, right? Long-term health care, because when you graduate, that knee still ain't right, right? When you walk off campus, that second concussion might hurt a little bit extra, right? Healthcare in the long term for especially things sustained in athletics is a must. And I say to say, frankly, until we start formalizing these pay-for-play kind of things, it feels like the only form of sports labor without a union. NBA, the NBPA, the NFLPA, MLBPA, etc. All these different pro sports leagues across America where the athletes are involved in a revenue, there's a union. There's a union making decisions for the betterment of the and frankly, I would argue that the owners of the pro sports teams still have the upper hand in all those conversations. There's at least a union, though, to have that conversation. And if we're going to pay the college football players, the college basketball players, the college athletes, some sort of monetary thing for what they're worth because of how much money they're circulating right now, that's awesome. That's a great first step. They also need a union because they also need to not get taken advantage of as 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids in a meeting room talking about dollars and cents. They need to have some sort of representation like any workforce does. Because otherwise, where's that revenue going? And in the revenue sport, when you don't know where the revenue is going, you open up a whole other Pandora's box that feels like the Pandora's box we opened a long time ago. Now, I ran and raved too long about that, but it's a thing that I think is an interesting thought piece conversation to keep talking about. If you want to continue the conversation, I'm going to tell him still. If you want to tell me I long for a time too long ago, you might be right. But you also should feel free to tell me in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for tuning in today and making the Locked On Coogs your first listen. Locked On Coogs is prominent Locked On podcast. Is your team, our Coogs, every day. Go Coogs.